I'm Royston Upson, and I'm actually a goldsmith, but I specialise in a thing called Mokume Gane. It's a Japanese technique. Now this, what you see here, is a kiln with a retort plate in it. And this will show you, I will show you how this turns into some of the most elaborate jewellery literally ever seen in the world. I am one of a very small handful of people who use this diffusion welding technique. And effectively what we have is, in this particular billet, it is 8 layers of palladium and 18 karat red gold. So it's actually 16 layers in total. And using a very simple technique that was actually developed nearly 300 years ago by a man called Denbi Shawami. As you can see, it's now been fused together. And what we actually create, from 2 different materials, we end up with one mass. And from one mass, we can actually create something like this, the most elaborate patterns ever seen. And Mokume Gane actually means wood grain metal. And as we go through the slides, you will see exactly what I mean by wood grain metal. So once it's all been cleaned up, this is a huge billet. I mean, this was about 5 inches by 5 inches. And this one is actually brass and copper. This one's been turned into numerous different bits and pieces. But it goes through so many different processes. You can actually see the huge hammer marks. And everything is done with nothing more than hammers, files, and a huge furnace. This is what it ends up as. This sheet in total length is nearly 14 inches long. So what starts off as a huge sheet gets cut into small pieces, stacked atop of one another, and then literally as you go through the processes, it ends up with all the gouges through it. So that is one piece of metal now. What started off as 16, potentially, there we go, 16 layers, ends up as one. The reason it is so difficult is because the process itself, which is known as diffusion welding, can only be done through 2 methods. One is pure skill, which is mine, and the other one is done through pure ingenuity and using the latest technology. And in fact, to do this under a scientific process would cost you around about £250,000. I literally use a furnace, a couple of steel plates, and some bolts. And the difference is I will sit there for as much as 8 hours watching it until it gets to the critical mass, when it effectively, you have to hold it at the critical mass for long enough for the electrons to actually migrate from one to another. Now, as it goes through the various processes, you can end up with what's known as the chevron effect. Now, this is my speciality. This is what I specialise in more than any other Mokume Gane artist in the world. I'm going to blow my own trumpet. I have been officially recognised as one of the top 20 Mokume Gane artists in the world. But unless you know what Mokume Gane is, you wouldn't even hear of it. So it doesn't really matter too much. This. This was, goodness me, this is a lot of the pieces I work on using the chevron pattern on the Norse or the Nordic Viking era pieces. And I do a lot of semi-reproductions, and I use a lot of the very masculinity behind them. And as you can see, these are all made from one piece of metal in the end. So it starts off as multiple, ends up as beautiful pieces of jewellery. I use a lot of the more traditional Japanese metals as well, things like shikudo, which is this one. It's a black metal, which again you can't buy, so you have to manufacture it. And again, I do it all in my studio, literally doing it through the old traditional methods of coal forges. Now this, this pair of bracelets, 400 hours of work to make this pair of bracelets. I still have them, only because they're too expensive for anyone to buy. They're £15,000. They're actually nothing more. This part here is nickel, silver, and copper. Sorry, no, nickel, silver, and silver, which has then been etched back and patinaed. The ends of them are actually 18 karat yellow gold. But again, it's not the intrinsic value of the material, it's the intrinsic value of the skill behind it. This is the biggest piece of what's known as ribbon Mokume in the world, that particular pair of bracelets. But you can also do, I traditionally work in 2 metals, but this one's 3. So we've actually got silver, copper, and nickel. And this is hairpins, again, based around the Japanese hairpins for the young Asian ladies. Was it Komodos? Geisha. Geisha. Komodo is something else. I don't know. You look very Japanese for a second. It's just a close-up, and you can see the brilliance of the colours. And this hasn't been enhanced. This is exactly how the material comes out once it's actually been finished and patinaed. And you can actually see the almost gold colour, but that is nickel silver. But because you've got the colour contrast of the other metals, you can see where you get the wood grain effect from, hence the Mokume Gane. Now, this little stack of rings, in total, was something like 490 hours worth of work. That's literally 1 week per ring. That is how demanding Mokume Gane is. We've got like 22 carat and silver, copper and silver, shakudo silver, nickel and silver. And then because the manipulation of the material can be done in any form, and I specialise in the twist patterns, and then it can go obviously into the chevrons, we actually have quarter rings, and these are just various different styles I work upon. But no two rings are ever the same. They can't be, because the material itself is always varying. Now, every single hammer blow, every single file stroke will change the material. And when I've actually done things like the double chevrons, it's the hardest and it's the most exacting, because it's hard to actually show you on this one. But what it is this was actually one bar that's been split right down the middle. So as you open it up, you actually get the chevrons on the inside. And it has to be forged and filed to bring out the pattern to become up as almost identical as possible. Again, this is the traditional alloys of shakudo, which is actually 95% pure copper to 5% pure gold. Again, it has to be alloyed, it has to be manufactured here in the UK. And I actually use copper pipe for my copper source, because it's actually a readily available source, but it's also an anti-oxidizing. So there's a lot of chemistry involved in knowing such methods. And it's amazing for me, because people like Denby Shirami, who've done this 300 years ago, had nothing but the raw elements and a coal forge. And it's absolutely fantastic in the knowledge of what these people produced. Thankfully, we've got modern engineering to be able to produce a lot of the skills that we do. And finally, actually, this was a picture from Vogue magazine. This last one is actually a thing called Damascus steel, which is actually the ferrous version of Mokume Gane. Both are wood grain metals. One's in steel, this one's stainless steel, and the others are in non-ferrous materials. There we go. Ta-da.